I need to muster up as much energy as I can. Tuesday, I defended my dissertation, and then Friday, we had a Vespers program. Vespers normally ends like 8:30, went till 10 o'clock. The students did not want to go back and rest on the Sabbath. They wanted to continue to hang out. And so yesterday was a long, long day, 8 o'clock till 10 o'clock. And so I'm excited to be here, even though my face may not show it. And so I am going to muster up as much energy and as much enthusiasm as I can as we talk about a safe place. I want you to think about this for a moment. What is a safe place for you? What is a safe place for you? You can yell it out, you can think it out in your head. A safe place for you. Anyone? Home. My grandmother's house has always been a safe place for me when I was growing up. I heard some people have said a mother's womb is a safe place. For me, the safest place has always been my mother's arms. The womb, my mother's womb, when I was in there, it wasn't a very safe place. My mother had apparently, I was a fighter and all of that sort of thing, and I gave my mother gallbladder stones or whatever, gallstones, whatever they call those things, and she had to have her gallbladder removed. And it was, back in the 80s, I guess it's kind of a pretty serious surgery to do, especially if you're pregnant. And so it wasn't a very safe place, for me. But I think about the safe places, and for me, it has always been my mother's arms. And I think back to when I was in elementary school, and this kid, he thought he was a tough guy. I grew up in Philly, and I watched too many Rocky movies. And so I thought I could fight until I actually met a kid underneath the flagpole, and, we're like, we're gonna do this thing. And I found out that moment I wanted to be a lover and not a fighter. And when I got home, the first person I ran to was my mom. And I cried, and I said, I don't want to fight anymore. It hurts. It's not like in the movies. And I think back to the other time when I was being a little mischievous, and my mother told me not to go to this one park. And I ended up riding my bike, and on this park, they have all these kind of like BMX jumps and all of these things. And I was no older than my youngest daughter, like 7 years old. And I think, I can do all of these sort of things that the big kids can do. And I'm out there against my mother's wishes and against her, against her counsel. I'm out there riding my bike, doing all these jumps until I stopped doing the jumps and fell off of my bike, and I ended up cutting my leg wide open. And it was one of those things, I don't know if you've ever hurt yourself, where you're like, oh no, I'm good, and then you're like, oh no, not so good, Like I immediately got up and I was like, oh, I'm good. And I looked at my leg and I was like, okay, that should be all right, because there's a huge gash there. But when I looked at it, it wasn't bleeding just yet. It was just kind of white and open. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. And then I started walking, and the thing was it was like a murder scene on my leg. And I went running home. I ditched the bike. I just left it in the park. And I was running home, and you have to cross this one street to get there, and there's cars everywhere. And I'm like, 7, 8 years old running through, bleeding. And I can just imagine what, people are thinking, what is this kid doing, And as soon as I got home, the first person I wanted to go to was my mom. And then I was like, yeah! As I tried to embrace her, and I didn't tell her where it happened because, that was for a later conversation. But for me, the safest place has always been my mother's arms. And I don't know about you, whatever your safe place is. I think back to what God's I think what God's desire, what his design for one of the safest places on earth should be. And I think that his hope, his dream is that the church should be the safest place on earth. But if we're real, a lot of times the church isn't always the safest place to be. And so that's what I want to explore today. How can we as a church be a safe place? Now here in Exodus chapter 34, we have our scripture reading for this morning, which is also be our passage where we're going to be hanging out most of the time. It says this in Exodus 34 verse 5, it says, "Now the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there, and he proclaimed the what? The name of the Lord." Okay? Now what is a name? Right? A name is something more than just, a word that sounds nice or that we could relate to. It actually is a defining characteristics of who this person is. God is, in other words, saying, I'm not just going to say, my name, but I'm going to tell you who I am, what I'm about. And so this is what God is about. This is his name. He says, in verse 6, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God is what? Merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness and truth. Now that word merciful, I'm not a Old Testament scholar, but that word merciful comes up. It's a very unique word in Hebrew. It only is ever attributed, that word, it's only ever attributed to God. And it comes from the word rahim or rahim, which literally means womb. So God is saying that he is womb. Now that's weird, right? Why would he say that? Why would he declare himself, womb? Well, you think about it, like a mother has a very special connection with a baby. And Sean Bryce, a really, really great theologian in, I think he serves in the Northwest. He's a pastor up there in one of the churches. He says this: God's heart for his people is that of a mother for her child that she has carried in her womb for 9 months. Now, I want you to think about that. So as a father, I have data, right? Naomi was born on November 16th. She was born sometime around 9 o'clock in the morning. She is a girl. She is my child. I have data points. But there's something different about a mother's connection with her child. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, you have carried a child for 9 months. That child is a part of your body. You feel every kick. You can feel, every movement. It is a part of your body for 9 months. And that care and that love that you have for that child over that period of time is something I don't believe fathers can really, really know. At least we can't experience it as you have experienced it. And that same care and concern and that same, connection that a mother has with her child in her womb for 9 months is what God is saying he has for his people. That same care, concern, connection, same love. God is saying, I'm that for you. I'm that safe place. So why is it so important that God is like that for us? Why is it so important to know that God has that care, that concern, that he is safe? Well, this one guy in a really great book, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. Has anybody ever read that book? So this guy, Bessel van der Kolk, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I don't know. But really great book, regardless of how you pronounce his name. The Body Keeps the Score. He's a medical doctor, and he devotes a lot of time to and research before he makes this statement. But he makes this statement, and I find it to be ring true not only in my life, but I see it in the people I interact with, and I just kind of see it through the lens of my experience. But when I read this in his book, it just resonated with me very much. He says this, he says, more than anything else, being able to feel safe with other people defines mental health. Think about this. He goes on to say, safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. He continues, as long as we feel safely held in the hearts and minds of the people who love us, we will climb mountains and we will move across deserts. Children and adults will do anything for people they trust and whose opinion they value. Do you find that true in your life? I find it true in mine. If I feel safe, if I trust a person, I'm willing to go above and beyond for them and go the extra mile because I know that, I value their opinion. I value their friendship. I value their relationship. You think about it for like a boss or a job. If you feel safe, if you're not worried about getting fired every 5 days, if you're not worried about, having, of failing, you're willing to step out and to do awesome things that you never thought you would be able to do, all because you feel safe. And you can think about it if you want to use this example, if I give you like a tightrope, okay, and we attach them across two buildings, high up, we're just say like 40 feet in the air, are you willing to walk across that tightrope? No? No one? I'm not. Okay, now if I attach like a safety harness to you, and then I put like a net below, would you be more likely to go and cross that tightrope? Some of us would. Me, I still wouldn't want to go out there. I hate heights. I learned that early on, like my knees turned to jello. But I would be more willing to go across that knowing that there's a safety net down there. And likewise, when you feel safe, when you have those safe connections and you trust people, you're willing to go out on the ledge because you know that even if you fail, they're not going to be they're not going to judge you. They're not going to throw you under the bus. They're not going to fire you, right? And so if you go through life without those safe connections, it's not necessarily really that great. He says this, if we feel abandoned, worthless, or invisible, nothing seems to matter. Those are people just kind of what difference does it make? Why does this matter? And so he is saying, believe it or not, safe connections, having those safe places are really, really essential to our mental health, to our well-being. He actually goes on in his book to say a lot of the mental health issues that people have, like post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental health issues, he goes on to say those safe connections are like the foundation of like healing. It's where healing begins. And if you never feel safe, how can you ever experience like how can you ever be a truly healthy individual, mentally, emotionally, and all the gamut? And so safe connections matter. Safe connections matter. It's fundamental to our health. It's fundamental to our mental health. It's fundamental to a lot of things. Now, the reason I think this is important is because we live in a world where it's very unsafe. There's sharp objects all around us, and it's really easy to get hurt. it's really easy to hurt other people as well. And so we need to have these safe connections. And here's the reality of the kind of unsafe world that we live in. You're either coming out of something painful, you're in the middle of something painful, or you're about to enter into something painful. So we're all going through something. We don't know each other's stories. We don't know each other's experiences. Some of us do to a certain extent, but maybe not everything. And so you're either going into something, coming out of something, or in the middle of something right now. And it's really easy to get hurt and to hurt other people. And it's important to have those safe spaces, that safety of where you can turn to when you're in something that's painful. We're in the middle of something that hurts. And here's the reality of the matter. The church is only safe to the degree that it can embrace people no matter where they are in their life journey. And I think that we have to really understand that. Everybody's at a different space. And so for us to come and, to judge or to put people down for various, for whatever the case is, we need to embrace people in their life journey and be more of encouragers rather than maybe, so harsh or critical. It's really easy to be critical to somebody else, but it's really hard to look in the mirror and examine our own hearts. And so we as a church need to come from a mindset of how can we embrace people no matter where they are at. Paul says this. What does a safe church look like? Well, it has to be able to embrace people no matter where they are in their journey. And Paul says this. He kind of lays out what a safe church looks like. He says, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual do what? Restore such a one in a spirit of," what's that word? "Gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted." Now, I want you to pay attention to his words there. He says, are you supposed to cast them out? Are you supposed to cast judgment on them? Are you supposed to push them away? No, rather he says to do what? He says, restore them. Restore them. And notice the last kind of phrase there. Considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. In other words, you yourself aren't any better than the person who has fallen, right? Be careful, because just like this person has fallen, you too could end up in that same position. And so be careful. But the point is that he's saying restore. Notice verse 2, it says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." Bear one another's burdens, restore one another's, and thus fulfills the law. How many of us are law-oriented here? I'm law-oriented. I follow the 10 Commandments. I do that to the best of my, the best of my ability, and how God empowers me to do that. And so part of fulfilling the law of Christ, according to what Paul is saying, is that we would bear one another's burdens, right? So we have that vertical aspect of God's law, right, where we have no other gods except Him, where we don't take His name in vain, and so forth and so on. But we have the horizontal plane, where we're relating to one another, where we're carrying one another's burdens, where we're restoring one another's, and that's just as important as the horizontal half. So when it comes to the law, so what does this look like? These are some of Jason's translations of this passage. Bear one another's burdens, carry one another's baggage, navigate one another's issue. And here's the one that that I need help on. Be patient with one another's dysfunctions, right? Be patient with one another's dysfunctions. Verse 3, he says, for if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. In other words, we're no better than the other person. Like, we may have our lives more together than other people, but that's only because of the grace of God. If it wasn't for the grace of God, we would be like the other people, right? And just because they don't have it all together doesn't mean that, they someday won't get their life together. And so we're in the position that we're in because God is so good to us and God is so gracious to us. And how can we go over to somebody else and be like, man, you're just too messed up to be here. Like, I don't want anything to do with you. Now, I will say there is a point in life where you have to draw boundaries between people, right? And I'm not saying should be in toxic relationships because, no. You have to draw boundaries. But there's a difference between drawing a boundary and saying for my mental health, for my spiritual health, I need to draw this and I need to we need some space, and just, judging somebody and putting somebody down because we somehow think that, we're more holy or more righteous or more spiritual than them. And so, the reality is we're all just sinners trying to figure this thing out in life. And some of us are a little bit further ahead in the journey. Some of us are a little bit behind. Some of us are somewhere in the middle. And that's okay, wherever we're at in our journey. All right, so here's a little illustration that I'll use here. Like I said, we're all at different walks in life, okay? So we're called the gray square, Christianity, okay? And all of these A, B, C, and X, Y, Z, they're all people. So you have Bob, Susie, and, Chet, because Chet, why not, right? So you have all these people, okay, and we're called the gray box Christianity. Now, according to this, who would be inside of kind of inside the Christian circle, according to this? It's not a trick question. Yet, A, B, and C, right? A, B, and C are in the circle of that we would call, or this square of Christianity. But if we want to narrow our focus a little bit more, we can create a point, and we'll call this point Christ or Jesus, okay? And so this point is Jesus. I tried to center it. It doesn't look centered to me though. But we'll say that that's a center point, okay? Now, looking at this, inside of our square of Christianity, who would be closest to the center point or our aim that we're trying to get to, which is Jesus? C, point C would be the closest. B is a little bit further away. A is kind of out there. X, Y, and Z, we'll pray for them, right? Now, as you know, and I know, life is not static, right? Life is constantly moving. We're constantly moving. We adapt, we change, we change over time. There's constant movement in our lives. Likewise, we're create a little more dynamic movement within our chart here. So we look at this and we say, well, C is obviously the closest to Jesus here, right? But now, as we add some movement into there, it actually looks like C is moving away, right, from Jesus. Z is moving towards, Z's on the outside, but he's moving towards the center point. X is moving towards the center point. A is moving towards the center point. Y is moving kind of towards that center point. And B is just confused. It's just kind of, it's like going all over the place. You know those people in life? Yeah, it's just kind of wandering. Yeah. So there's a continual movement. And what the point that I'm trying to illustrate here, it's not a perfect illustration, so please don't, like look too deeply into this. But the point is that from our perception, I look at this and I say, C is the closest. C probably has it all, the most together. C is, ready to, go see Jesus tomorrow kind of thing. But the reality is C is moving further away, and X, even though X is on the outskirts there, he's like making a beeline right to Jesus, or she is making a beeline right to Jesus. And so just because we see something or someone in a certain way doesn't necessarily mean that that's the actual reality. You know what I'm saying? Because God, last time I checked, God is the God of miracles and can turn somebody's life around in an instant and in a moment. And we sit back and we can judge and we can be critical and we can look at them all day long, but we don't know what is going on in their heart. We don't know how God is working in their lives. And so sometimes as a church, maybe it's just best to sit down and just be quiet and to just sit alongside of them and be a part of their journey and helping them and encourage them and help them to establish a relationship with Jesus, help them to grow in their relationship with Jesus. So often, just want to talk. And I'm learning, especially as a chaplain, when you're in there's so many instances that God puts me in, and I'm like, how am I even going to respond to this? Humans are so complicated, we are complicated people. If somebody's figured out humanity, let me know, because every time you think okay, I know how to answer this, I know how to do that, there's somebody who come into my office and I'm like, Lord, I have no idea what am I going to say? And sometimes it's good just to be quiet and just to listen and to just be there in their presence, knowing that you're a safe place, knowing that you're not going to judge them, and knowing that you're there for them. And so we're all at different walks in our life. And so who are we to look on somebody and say, well, too bad for you. So what does an unsafe church look like? Well, in John, let me make sure I get the scripture right. In John chapter 8, in verses 1 and 2, Jesus is teaching, and a woman is caught in adultery. Y'all remember the story? John chapter 8, the woman caught in adultery. They try to trap Jesus and say, listen, we've caught this woman in adultery. The law says that she needs to be put to death. And so what are you going to do? And so Jesus starts writing in the sand, right? He starts writing out, hey, listen, you're probably no better than she is, kind of thing, right? And so he says, the best sermon I think I've ever heard. Well, I don't think it's a sermon, but I love the words of Jesus, where he says, he who is without sin, do what? Cast the first stone. Everybody takes up the stone, right? They all had them in their hand. And one by one, they all what? They all left, right? They all dropped their stones. They all leave, as Jesus writes in the sand, right? This church, if you will, of judgmental people, of people who are condemning this woman who, she legitimately broke the law. She is guilty and she's caught in the act. And does she deserve to be condemned? Probably so, right? That's what the law says. And yet Jesus writes down in the sand, says, he without sin cast the first stone. Now, all of them walk away because all of them have sin, right? Out of everybody who's in that crowd, who's the only one who has a right to throw the stone? Last time I checked, he never threw that stone. The only one in the crowd who had a right to throw the stone was Jesus, and Jesus never throws the stone. And I think that's important, because as Jesus could have condemned her, she was guilty, she broke the law, she was caught in the act. He doesn't condemn her. Instead, he says, listen, just change your life. Don't do this again, right? Go and sin no more, right? And I think that speaks a lot about our lives as well. All of us are guilty. All of us have broke the law. All of us are condemned. And yet, by the grace of God, he says no. Even though you're condemned to death, I'm going to die so that you can live. And now we have the awesome, and I do mean the awesome opportunity to spend eternity with Jesus. And I look forward to that day. I mean, does anybody else look forward to that day? I cannot wait till I no longer have to look at the news and look at the headlines of seeing another shooting, of seeing another death, of seeing more tragedy and more pain. And I think the more you look around, it's just more and more heartbreaking. And I think as time winds up, it's going to become even more heartbreaking. And I just look forward to the day when I can see Jesus coming in those clouds and all of this stuff will be gone. Why? Because he doesn't condemn me, because I accepted him and I choose to live my life for him. But then he's done all of that and we turn around and then we want to be judgmental and we want to look down on people and we want to throw stones at people. How can we possibly do that? I'll say this much, it's not our place to do that. God is the only one who can throw that stone. Let him throw it if he wants to throw it. But it's not us. It's God. And so an unsaved church, what does an unsaved church look like? It looks like a judgmental church. It looks like a church that is critical. It looks like a church that, puts people down, and probably people who think way too highly of themselves. But what does a safe church look like? I would argue that a safe church looks like a church that can embrace people from all walks of life, people from any space in their journey, people from the worst of the worst to the best of the best to somewhere in the middle, from the rich to the poor, from all social economic backgrounds, no matter where they're at in their life. A church that embraces people no matter where they find themselves in their journey. A safe church feels a lot like being in a mother's arms. Feels a lot like a safe place to be. And so my challenge to the church this morning, to the Leesburg Seventh-day Adventist Church, that you would be the church, continue to be the church that God has called each and every one of us to be. A safe place where God is glorified, where he is high and lifted up, and where his transforming work takes place in his time, not so much our time, to be the church that people feel safe in. And so that's my challenge to you, and I pray that you will continue on that path that God has called you to be, the safe place.